All right, everybody. I want everybody to welcome our very special guest for this week, Mr. Timothy Fling. Welcome, Tim.
Hey, thanks for having me, guys. I am excited to be back. I had such a good time on the last show.
Yeah, thanks for being back. I think it might be our third or fourth time chatting, or maybe more
At
than I
least
don't,
third.
a
I
third.
think it's
Yeah, at
third.
least
I
third.
think
Yeah.
it's third.
So we always appreciate you dropping by and talking about all the amazing things you got going on. I know we were talking about it a little bit before we started recording, but I guess let's just start with how are things been? Have you been doing a lot of cons, or have you been traveling around a lot, or
Yeah, we
just
had a
yeah,
pretty busy 2024. This is our convention season this year.
yep,
I think I kind of mentioned it to you guys. We were trying to make an effort to, be invited as guests to conventions.
yep,
So for a fellow like me, I'm not particularly famous or anything. So what that means is that instead of doing, 5 or 6 big conventions, I do 10 or 12 little ones. And what I mean by that, your big ones would be like your Baltimore Comic Con, which I still do, and then there's like New York or San
yep,
Diego. These are whoppers that I actually have difficulty getting into because you have to have a certain amount of followers to even be approved to get into
yeah,
one.
Mhm.
But also at my level, there's quite a bit of cost to attend some of these. And of course, I understand that there's a cost for marketing your product, and you have to do it to be relevant in the marketplace. But I'm trying to find a way that's a little bit more user friendly for me, and that took the form of, I do like Philadelphia and Hagerstown and
hmm
Harrisburg and Hershey, still relatively good sized cities. But the reason why that's beneficial for me is like in some of these, I might be either the only comic creator
mm,
or one among a handful. And I
wow,
kind of like that
yeah,
because, again, this is one man's opinion. But sometimes you go to one of the big ones, like Baltimore, for instance, which I love. Please don't hear that I'm disparaging Baltimore. But, you have a large segment of their audience base. They're really there to meet celebrities or wrestlers or to meet the
hmm
fella that was a hobbit, this kind of thing. And while there's nothing wrong with that, that's maybe not necessarily what's best for my brand. It isn't always about sales, you understand. And
hmm
of course, I'm going to talk out of both sides of my mouth because we all want to sell more books. It's very true.
Mhm.
But there is an element of to making sure you're reaching your target customer. And even if they don't buy anything, you still might meet them and have an interaction. Maybe they take your card. Maybe they're going to start watching your podcast, this kind of thing.
yep,
So if you go to a smaller one, again, this is what one man's opinion, it's much easier to get noticed. And, I think that especially when you go among other comic collectors,
yeah,
like chances are somebody that's a comic collector is going to like my material.
hmm
So if I'm at a small convention where people are selling Silver Age comics and this type of thing, they're going to come right over to what I'm doing and be like, "Oh, this looks kind of cool." It's like what they're used to.
right,
And kind of the other side of that shoe is that if somebody's there because they're into maybe sports figures or Funko Pops or
hmm
Pokemon soaps or whatever the weird product of the day is.
What do you think, Chris? Pokemon?
And like I
Toasting
say,
me.
I'm not. Look, everybody's got to make a living. I respect
Yeah.
someone that's
I
anybody
clean
that's
myself with
making.
Pikachu all the time, Mike. I don't know what you're talking about.
Well, you know what I'm saying. You go to
Yeah.
some of these big conventions, and it's. I always
Oh, for
use
sure.
Baltimore as the example, and it's
Yeah.
they have what they call an artist alley,
Yeah.
Mhm.
and I want to say it's last year was 330 right in a
Wow.
row.
Wow.
And they're not always people that are making comics, right? It can be
hmm
like there was one girl that was making custom dog food, and there's
Oh, yeah.
the sticker dealer. And while I support that stuff and I want you to be super successful, I at times have to look at it and be like, maybe this isn't the best reflection for my brand. Like
hmm
I don't know that does help me, and maybe it even
Yeah.
hurts.
It's funny because you have a good point about that. Last time I was at New York Comic Con, which is several years ago now, you have to get through all of the pop culture to get to Artist Alley.
Mhm.
And then if you're not going there looking for somebody specific, I feel like it's really hard to attract new readers and new fans if you're not a fan of comic books in general to then get to your table in this sea of other artists that you had to find in the first place, you know.
I also feel like you go to those, and while I myself, and I know Mike does the same thing, but we'll look for the small creator and try to find the gem within the con.
Right.
You're also like, don't get me wrong, I'm also excited, like, oh, dude, Joshua Williamson's here. Like, I love Superman.
Right.
You know, so there's so much there where the smaller cons, especially like we talked about one, a local to be, that's a sci-fi con, like you fit right in at that because your books are very science fiction heavy.
Yeah.
Whereas if I'm a sci-fi fan, I go to a sci-fi con, you know, I expect to see sci-fi stuff, books, comics, whatever. So, yeah.
Well, and I will say that, you know, there's a benefit to both. Like the thing, if you do like Baltimore, over the course of 3 days, you might meet 1,000 customers. Well, that that might be a little high.
Yeah.
Let's say 500 customers. But if you go to the smaller one, you might only meet 100. But man, they're right in your demographic. It's like you're more likely to convert more buyers out of that 100.
Yeah.
I think that, you know, also when you talk about profit wise, and sometimes people will chime in and they'll say things like, yeah, but conventions aren't always about being profitable. It's your marketing. It's how you meet the people. And they're 100% right. But for a guy at my level, I've got to try and recoup as many of my costs as possible because that's what helps me get to the next con. So, you know, when you talk about doing the smaller ones, since I have less costs going in, it's almost all profit, and that's how I power up the rocket to get to the next con.
And that's always important. And I think so. I think we'll talk about a couple of your new podcasts before we get into the couple books you got coming out. So we were talking a little bit. I think last time you wanted to start a UFO podcast, and now you have a ghost sightings podcast. So let's talk about those a little bit.
Sure.
What's going on with this UFO podcast?
Well, if you guys remember, I started and I'm not an expert, right? This is about a year, and I started about a year and a half ago, maybe not even a year and a half ago. And at the time, what we did is I wanted to support independent creators, very similar to what you guys are doing. So thanks for doing that. Because I think there's not enough venues for people that are creative types to have a place to advertise what they're doing. So that show we started doing once a week, and that was the Creative Cranium podcast, and it's on the Indie Comics Network. And it was very well received, and we do a number of comic creator related topics, like you know, how to save money on shipping, and you know, Kickstarter tips, and how to effectively use social media. But after about a year, I started to notice something, which was that the audience for that show tends to be other comic creators. Not that there's anything wrong with that.
Right.
But what I needed to do was to find a little bit larger umbrella that would embrace customers. And hopefully they would discover what I was doing. And we started to say things like, well, what are some subjects that I really enjoy? You know, because first off, you have to be passionate about it, right?
Right.
And the second thing is that also maybe would dovetail into my work, what I'm making. And the first obvious answer was the UFO podcast. And we started doing that. We're on the 6th or 7th episode, I think now. And essentially what we do, it's a panel of 4. And we get together and, you know, we try and debunk the UFO sightings. Like, was it real or was it a hoax? And we try and go through the science and when it happened and the camera angles and the lightings and see if we can make some kind of determination about whether these things are real or was it a hoax. And like almost right away, the UFO podcast right out of the gate started performing better than the other podcast. So that was like a light going off on my head, right? It's like, okay, well, since that was going great, let's try and branch out one more time. And it's still only once a week. This isn't all that really changed is the content. It's like a rotating schedule. So after that, we started the Ghost Sightings podcast. And same thing, almost right away, some of those get double the views of the Creative Cranium. And so then we had the idea, okay, look, let's just do everything we love. And the new one is, it's called The Invisible Theater. That comes on the 24th of this month. And that's the music podcast where I interview bands.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. And the idea being that if you're watching our network, it goes UFOs, ghost sightings, music, then comics. And then it just starts over. It just starts over. And the benefit of it is, to creators, is the panels are always, it's basically a group of comic creators coming on to analyze these things. So the people still get a mouthpiece. Right. And they still get, and we get to the end and we still always advertise our books.
Yeah, right, of course.
But it's something other than, the problem with the other, I shouldn't say the problem, the challenge with the other one is that, we weren't reaching much of an audience. Like the comic creator audience is a very, very small group of people. So I needed to do something that would reach other people and hopefully customers. And, I've always been interested in UFOs ever since I was a kid. And even in my books that I write, especially the Cryptid book, UFOs have a pretty prominent part. It's really the backdrop of the story is a UFO sighting. So I wanted to, basically what we do is we take like a case of the week and we just sort of analyze it. I don't know if you guys ever remember a TV show. It was called Project Blue Book. And it was about two Air Force colonels. I think it was even remade once. I think there was one in the 70s and one in the 90s. And basically, it's like an episode of the week where they go out and somebody saw a UFO and they start asking these questions and see if they can figure out if it was real or not. And that's kind of our format. And I get 4 comic creators and, it's moderated. I go around the room and I ask them a question. And hopefully by the end, we can reach a consensus. We don't always reach a consensus, so that's part of the interesting thing. But
I think it's it's pretty relevant over the last few months. You've seen all these court hearings and people that used to work with UFOs and all this stuff and all this drone talk and everything. Especially it always amazes me, and I'm a big believer. Like every episode of Unsolved Mysteries that involves UFOs I've seen. I grew up watching that with my grandmother in the early days.
I love that stuff.
And I think nowadays it's always mind-boggling to me with like everybody's walking around with like a high-definition camera in their pocket, and for some reason every time we get a video or a picture or something, it's like it's out of focus.
It's so blurry, yeah. And you have a great point, especially considering.
It hasn't changed. Yeah.
There's a great line from, do you remember the movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind?
Yep.
Oh, hell yeah.
One of the greatest of all time, right?
Oh, yeah.
There's a great line in there, and the guy says, well, if these things are real, what's with the blurry photos? Why haven't we ever been able to get a good photo of one? And there's a news reporter who stands up. Do you remember this part? And he goes, well, I got to tell you, I've been a professional news reporter for 30 years, and I've never been able to take a picture of a plane crash as it was happening.
Oh, yeah, true.
And he kind of has a good point. Now, that's not true anymore because now we have had a couple of pictures of plane crashes.
Yeah, we see,
But it is admittedly rare.
I was going to say, as somebody who, has to take pictures of their food for an app for my diet, and B, someone who is in love with this little guy right here and tries to take pictures of him all the time. It's pretty hard to get him in focus.
Yeah.
Even with these cameras in our pockets.
And we did see
you guys see the one I post on Instagram. You don't see the hundreds that are going on. Like, just stay still, goddammit.
Try to be cute for the Instagram. Come on. That's funny. Yeah, we can't tell the aliens to do that.
And we talked about we did see it. Now, I'll be honest with you, I've never seen a UFO or anything. I don't have any kind of bias. I'm very interested.
Yeah.
But we did see about 2 weeks ago, my son and I out on the porch. If you guys don't know, I live in central Pennsylvania, which is one of the places where we are having what they call these drone sightings. And we did see one of them. And it was the first thing is we're very excited. Hey, maybe it's a UFO. Well, we quickly determined it's obviously not a UFO.
Yeah.
But it was also not a plane because it was flying really low.
Right.
And it was also relatively slow moving. And it had like these 4 flashing lights on it. And it was, I'm going to say it was smaller than a car, but bigger than a microwave. But it was, I wouldn't have known what it was. But, you could tell it wasn't quite a plane, but there was nothing spooky or a UFO-like about it.
Right.
And it was just kind of like chugging along through the sky. And we were like, that's one of those drones these guys have been talking about.
Yeah. It's interesting because I had a I've known some people in my life, and I had a coworker probably almost 7 or 8 years ago now, and occasionally we'd go on work trips, and he said something like, "Did you see the drones?" And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" And this was like 8 years ago. He goes, "You could see them from the plane," and I'm like, and he was one of those conspiracy theorists that saw drones from planes, and there's a group of people that have been seeing these for years, and I mean, it was probably almost 10 years ago now, so like we didn't have the quality of cell phones and stuff we have now, but now when I see all these news reports and people like yourself spotting them, I'm like, man, was he right? Like,
Yeah.
like they've been around this whole time, and now people are just starting to see them. Like,
what made me laugh about the ones that, Tim, you're talking about from recent news was when people started saying they were UFOs and everything. And coming from somebody who believes in aliens and all that, and that they're probably watching us in some way, I'm like, it's really funny that the aliens have FAA regulated lights and everything on their
Right.
UFOs.
they took that into account, right?
Yeah, great point. Great point. That's what we were kind of talking about with my son. Because here's the thing: I got to admit to you, I've never seen a UFO or even a ghost or anything even really. I want to, and I'm passionate. But even seeing this object, it was obviously a kind of terrestrial object. There was nothing spooky about it.
Right.
And it's like Chris says, it had even like you see in the news footage, it had the FAA approved. It was like a sequence of red flashing. Right. I guess that's not a landing light. It's to keep it from running into something, right?
Yeah.
So, and we were like, oh, that's not a UFO. We both kind of wanted it to be a UFO.
Yeah. Right.
But we were also like, wait a minute, that's not a plane either.
Right.
And you could tell it wasn't even plane shaped. It was like a drone shape,
Mm-hmm.
So one of my father's big retirement things that he does, his retirement hobby that he has, is drones. So he has like one of those $5,000 like really nice drones and everything, and he went through the FAA regulation to get like licensed and everything. Like you're supposed to when you buy a drone, but nobody ever does it. So just through like osmosis, because he's so into it, and when you're talking to somebody, they're into something, you gain a little knowledge from them. And I've learned so much crap that I never in my life would care to learn about this stuff. And that was one of them. Like, yeah, they put the lights on there. That's all FAA regulation for like, so it's visible. So it doesn't run into certain things.
Well, it
does a lot of different things for it. And when I saw those drones on the news, I was just like, those are obviously, they're from the United States in some way. Like whether they're commercial, whether they're private, or whether they're government. And all that.
Yeah. I totally agree. Yeah. And even seeing this one, like I wanted it to be mysterious and spooky. Yeah. And like the more we watched it, it was like, okay, this isn't anything spooky.
I think about it too, because going kind of shifting to cryptids real quick. I think of all these people that saw cryptids, and as somebody that's lived in the country their most, if not all of their life, like I could see, especially how a city person would see something in the woods or whatever and be like, holy shit, what is that? Because like you see a fox or something, and all you see, because of the way their eyes work, are just these bright eyes and this kind of weird shaped body because it's in the woods and it's dark and everything. Yeah. Where I can be like, oh, that's a fox, or that's a coyote, or that's whatever.
If you've ever heard a fox like scream, it sounds like a young child scream.
Look up,
which is terrifying.
It does.
Not that I live near elks, I live near deer, but look up what the sound an elk makes during the rut. It's demonic, dude.
Yeah, is it? Yeah. Yeah. You hear some
scary.
Crazy shit. Yeah, if you're not used to hearing that stuff, for sure. So, I mean, Chris kind of mentioned that there. You had the success of Call of the Cryptid, the first book, right? So you got plans for the second. Can you give us an update on that? Or
Yeah, I sure can. And we've even got, it's about 3 pages in. The next one, it's going to be 24 pages. Okay. And the basically, if you remember, the theme of each issue is to introduce new cryptids. And the theme of this one is that after defeating the Men in Black, this alien that's running the show is trying to get this crystal back from Cadence, the girl. So after his first team fails, he sends in the lieutenant, which is the Flatwoods monster. Okay. Which, you remember, all the cryptids are a little bit like a reimagining. So in this case, the Flatwoods monster is it looks like him, but he's like a plant creature, and his power is he can control the vegetation. So he's like making the forest like grow these tentacles and try to strangle them.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah.
It's a little bit. I don't know if there's any Swamp Thing fans in the room, but in my version, yeah, the Flatwoods monster has what we would consider Swamp Thing powers.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and the book's been. Thanks so much for your support.
Yeah,
it's been a very popular book. Unfortunately for this one, it kind of has the hand painted pages that Irwin does, so they come out slow. This isn't a book. It's never going to be 3 issues a year, unfortunately for me, but it is planned to go to. It's going to be about 108 pages total. It'll be a square bound graphic novel.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, that first issue was really great, and there's someone that's always interested in this kind of stuff. Like, it was cool how you meshed everything together. I liked I liked kind of steampunk Bigfoot, the way that your artist designed that.
He wears goggles, yeah. The deal is that he has he's got to travel between the dimensions.
Yeah.
And the framework of it is that the aliens and the cryptids are not necessarily extraterrestrial. They're like extra dimensional, like they're coming from another dimension. And he has to wear these goggles when he's going back and forth between the dimensions, which I thought was kind of a fun touch.
Amazing. Yeah.
When you're looking up and like, actually, so you're past with like this kind of stuff, because you said you have a passion for like UFO sightings and cryptids and all that. Where does some of the influence come from? Like, for instance, as somebody, I spent about an hour or two yesterday looking up books that I want to read this year, and I dove into like all these cryptid books and all these UFO books, and then like history books and all that stuff, but those were big ones. What's kind of your influences going into this kind of stuff? What's the stuff that really pushed you in this direction, made you interested?
I'm really glad you asked me that question, Chris, because I got one right at the beginning, and I'm going to tell you about a story I heard when I was maybe 10 years old.
Awesome.
And it inspired me to do this, and even to this day. And this was a story my grandmother told me, who, when she told me, she must have been 75 years old at the time. Now, first thing was, so she would have told me this story in probably 1974. So she wouldn't have known the word flying saucer or UFO. She wasn't really that kind of person, She would have had what we would consider a basic education. And I can remember the other relatives were kind of making fun of her because she had seen something in the sky.
Yep.
And I said, well, what are they asking you about, Grandma? And she said, well, and part of it is the way she tells the story. Mm-hmm. She says, well, I'm sitting here with Marge, who's my other grandmother. She says, we were watching the Dean Martin show. He's dead now, Timmy. And I said, I know Dean Martin's dead, Grandma. Just tell me the story.
Yeah.
She says, well, I'm looking at the curtains in front of the window, and I could see there was a little bit of light coming through the curtain. And she said, well, what's that? It must be a fire truck parked outside, right? So she says, I went up and I went to the curtains, and I opened the curtains up, and I looked up, and there was this huge pie plate in the sky.
Yeah.
She said pie plate.
Yeah. Amazing.
And which what we would have called a flying saucer, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And she said, as I looked up into it, it was covered by these discs on the bottom, and each one had lights coming out. Mm-hmm. One was blue, and it was going this way, and the other one was orange, and it was going this way. Mm-hmm. And I watched it, and it was hovering, and at the time, there was like an electrical transformer on top of a phone pole right outside of her house.
Okay.
And she said it was hovering right on top of that and sort of pulsing, like she thought maybe it was taking power out of the transformer. Mm. She said, so I yelled over to Marge. I said, Marge, come over here and take a look at this pie plate. And which, by the way, the way she described it, the size of this thing had to be 100 feet across.
Yeah. Right.
It was good. It was a big size.
Yeah.
Bigger than a drone.
Mm-hmm.
Well, not that there were any drones really in 1974.
Right. Yep.
And so my other grandmother, which they lived right down the street from each other, so it's very normal for the two of them to be hanging out.
Yeah.
She says, so Marge comes over, she takes 3 or 4 steps. And my grandmother said, and in the time it took her to get from the couch to the window, I'm watching the thing and it just shrank in the sky.
Wow.
Now, she said shrank as if it shrank down to nothing. But what she was seeing was, of course, it was zooming away, right?
Yeah.
Or potentially dematerializing.
Right.
So by the time my other grandmother got there, she didn't see anything. Mm-hmm. And, of course, the question all my relatives always asked her is they say, well, her name was Rachel. They say, well, Rachel, had you had a couple of beers that night? And she said, Yeah, I had. Which she had a couple of beers every night, though, and it didn't make her see pie plates in the sky.
Right. Yeah.
And what makes it the most compelling to me is here is a person with no history of ever seeing anything like that, no history of any kind of weird reports of anything, no, she didn't report it to the newspaper or try to get any kind of UFO notoriety. The only ones she told were us and the family. But that was the first time I started going, you know what? There's things in this world that we don't quite understand. She saw something strange.
Right.
And even though there was no proof of it or, nothing, there was no photographs or anything, but I believed her. And that was her only strange thing she ever saw. It wasn't like every week she had it. Now I saw Bigfoot and now I saw this. That was her only time.
And it's funny. It's funny you mentioned that because I have a similar story from my grandmother that I think took place in the late '60s, early '70s, where she was driving along with I forget who was in the car with her, but I don't know if you're familiar with Jehovah's Witnesses. I think they were Jehovah. I think she was a Jehovah's Witness at the time, very religious, and they saw something floating in the sky down the highway, and she pulled over. And it's funny because when she explained it to me when I was younger, it wasn't a pie plate. She said it was like a floating, almost like a rectangle, almost like a box in the sky, and a bunch of lights all around it. And since then, I mean, that's probably 20 something years later after she told me this story, I've seen a lot of videos, movies, documentaries explaining that very similar shape that she saw that night. Thinking like, well, there can't be this huge conspiracy that my grandmother was part of.
Right.
And
exactly.
And she almost was fearful to tell people because at the time, the person she was with, I don't know how they were tied together, but they said, okay, well, they're very religious, so they're like, this isn't a good thing. We need to get in the car. We need to drive. Like, we shouldn't even be looking and acknowledging that this thing's happening. And that was their response, was fear, like fear of God, fear of something. Like, what is this thing? And they drove on, and I was one of the only people she ever told that story to. But to this day, it's so funny when I hear similar stories of that time and of even later times where it's a similar shape. And it's like, yeah, I don't think our grandmothers were part of some secret society that would pitch these stories. Or maybe they are. Maybe that's the cryptid thing, is the secret society of grandmothers.
Well, maybe you just discovered the truth behind Mothers Against Drunk Driving. They all get together and just talk about aliens instead.
Well, that's a great point, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because one of the things that we talk about on the UFO podcast is it's easy to say things like, well, it's a hoax. The guy was making this up. Mm-hmm. But then you got to ask yourself the question, why? Because look, in 2025, I get it, because now we have the internet and there's UFO fame. But if you want to talk about somebody in 1962 claiming that they saw a UFO, they were likely to be ridiculed more than anything else. There was no UFO fame. And you talk about most of these people, they weren't trying to write a book or to sell more newspapers. They were people that saw something that freaked them out.
Yeah. I think that's another good point, too. Yeah, there's no fame to be made here. You'll be ridiculed.
Yeah.
The question I have is, what kind of beer were they drinking back then that made them see things? Because
listen, Chris, I'm going to tell you, and you're going to know it. She was a Genesee drinker. Do you know what that is?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I was going to say a lot of people in the U.S. won't know that one, but people in upstate New York do.
Just getting that cream ale. Is that what's doing it?
Yep, Jenny Cream Ale. Yeah.
Jenny Cream Ale. That was my first job as an intern in the chemistry lab there.
Yep. Yeah, that's right there. It's in Rochester, right?
Yeah, right in Rochester. I worked the overnight shift. It was
nice.
It was an experience. Definitely some cryptids walking around there.
It was in Rochester.
Yeah, it was in Rochester. So the call of the cryptid number 2. Do you have an idea? Like, you're going to launch a Kickstarter, right? So maybe towards the middle of the year, you think?
Yeah, they say not to launch it in the beginning of the year, so I'm going to say probably May. Let's say May for right now. Yeah, I can tell you about 4 pages are done, so it's about 1/6 of the way, and we're doing it in batches of pages of 4 at a time. So we got and the lettering and stuff goes pretty fast, but generally, once the pages are completed, I feel comfortable to launch the Kickstarter because it's easy to adjust lettering. What's not easy is if you have a delay in pages in the art, because can be duplicated. But the lettering, if you're halfway through the lettering and something happens to your letterer, well, you can hire another letterer and that part's a little easier. So I think that the middle of the year, and it'll also, again, it's going to come with another theme song, and there'll be 2 new trading cards, which are the Flatwoods Monster. Awesome. And the spoiler, it's not a spoiler because he's on the cover, but it's the Loch Ness Monster.
Nice. Very cool.
So let me ask you, because I was trying to make sense of this, and I actually announced to the Substack that in the past when I did my crowdfunding stuff, spotlights, it would be books I actually contributed to, and this year I said that that's no longer the case because things have gotten so expensive that I've become either digital or trade waiter. And there's exceptions to that rule, obviously, like any rule. How do you feel about like pricing on Kickstarter right now? Like, has your costs gone way up? And what's the price of your books right now? And do you find there's an issue customer to creator with like a $14, $15 issue, stuff like that?
Well, first, thanks for that question. That's a great question. So I'll say, first, the answer to the increasing costs, yes, it's crazy, right? So the first thing, let me give a thoughtful answer here because this has affected me. I used to always try to make it so that there would be one sort of like an entry-level price point, which in the past, that was always a $6 book for a 24-page book. Now, in the age of the shipping, though, now that's an $8 shipping book. So you're still in for, $14, $15. And in my case, even the 24 pagers will now be $10 books. So, in my case, you're going to have a $10 book and then a 15 and then a 30, which is like a Chrome. And then there's usually a set or two, like as a set, you get all for $50. But I will say Kickstarter customers have been pretty cool in the sense that they get it, that it's like two things. It's a boutique experience. So they're not really looking for a $5 book. They get that part. And the second thing is that, they take pride kind of in, hey, I helped to fund this book, right? It's something that you can be a part of the process, which is, we're real honored to have the customers that do that. Because the truth is, at my level, without the people crowdfunding it, I wouldn't be able to keep going. As we talked backstage, I pay for my costs up front. You know what I mean, to all the artists and stuff, because I think that's good policy and you get a little bit better reputation. But then I reimburse myself out of the Kickstarter and hopefully even make a couple of bucks. But in my case, whatever comes in extra, that goes right into the production of the next book. Like I don't keep any of that money.
Right. That makes sense.
So yeah, I would say that for many creators, it's probably a similar experience. And you're seeing now a lot of people, I would say for a digital book, probably about $5, $6 is about right. That might go up a little bit. But the good thing there is you don't have any shipping, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Now, but I'm right there with you, Chris, because I used to try to support as many creators as possible. And what you soon realize is that you can't afford that many books. Even my wife said to me, she's like, look, what are you doing? Like, I got a short box full of books that I never even cracked open yet.
Right.
Yeah.
So that was one of the reasons behind, I want to support the indie community. They've been great to me. So that was one of the reasons about having podcasts, which, by the way, thank you for doing yours, because it's the way that we can help indie creators to get these cool products made. So I don't know what the answer will be as far as the future of Kickstarter, but my sense is you're going to see two things. You're going to see an escalating price point, which is an entry-level price point of probably about $15 to $20 being the lowest. And, you're also going to see a ever-increasing amount of AI-generated books and NSFW books, which are going to be your two most successful categories for Kickstarter. And they're among the most successful categories now. That's not me throwing rocks or anything, but it's just something I got to be aware of because I don't do any of those things. We talked about it. I'm against AI. I realize I'm probably in the past. And my material is, I'm a sci-fi writer. I don't have anything against the NSFW books, and I get it why people do it. That's how you
Right.
get a 5-figure Kickstarter going.
Right. Oh, for sure. Yeah.
But it's also the number one way to get other writers to not really take you too seriously because, let's be honest, Ray Bradbury didn't do that. Isaac Asimov didn't do that. I want to be lumped in with the great writers,
Right.
not necessarily the great Kickstarter makers.
Yeah.
If you look at the great Kickstarter makers, and I love them, lots of these guys and gals are friends of mine, you're going to notice they all have something in common, which is it's NSFW content. And, I don't try not to say this because it's considered controversial, but some people call them booby books, right? Like you'll have a nice cover and a naughty cover. I don't do anything
cheesecake
like that.
covers, we call them.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I've tried a few and I don't get it personally. I mean, I'm going to give everyone a life hack, save you some money. Just Google boobs. They're everywhere. All over the place.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and hey, look, I get it. Sex sells, and my question is, I'm always when I'm on other people's podcasts, I can be a little bit more controversial because when I'm on my own show, I always have to be diplomatic.
Yeah.
But the truth is, I respect people that make NSFW content. But I would ask you this question: why not just go full bore and go into the pornography business? Because there's nothing wrong with that either. And if you say, well, I want to do it to make money, I got a buddy who's in the adult film business. He runs a website. Makes like $60,000 a month.
There's a lot of money in
Yeah.
industry.
So and again, let me
crazy.
specify, I wouldn't dream of doing that at any stage of my career.
Right.
It's just not who I am.
Yeah.
But I got nothing against it. I get it that's a way to make money.
Yeah.
And we've talked to, for instance, Pat Shand is one of the bigger ones out there.
Yep.
And his passion for that medium and everything and why it's important and why he has an artistic feel for it. I think he's in the minority of that group personally. I could be wrong. But yeah, it's funny. I was doing my spotlight last Friday and I was looking through everything trying to find something that I thought was interesting. And I've had to put out a post that said there's nothing because I don't like booby books. And everything that seemed interesting was coming soon, so I did a post about that. But I think my main concern with Kickstarter right now is, and I'm not saying it's the creator's fault. It like you said, costs are going up across the board. But at what point are we selling less books at a higher price? What point have we gotten to it where it's so boutique that it's no longer accessible to people, and you're not selling books to a wider audience.
Yeah.
And also, I noticed not a lot of Kickstarter creators, and I'll throw out Travis Gibb as a for instance here, because he does do this, make an effort to do something outside of Kickstarter, like a website, where you can sell the books at a cheaper price.
Right.
After the fact. You won't get all the goodies with it. You won't be the first in line. But hey, it's $5 cheaper after the fact, maybe 6 months down the line or something.
Yeah.
And I think that's a big mistake too, because it's hard because everybody's thinking, you might be thinking, Tim, who's going to come to timothyfling.com? But you're gaining an audience. They talk about the book. Somebody might. Mm-hmm. And if you do something like what Travis did, which is do ash cans on his website to get interest into the Kickstarters, you could see it. I think we're coming into a time where people like yourself are going to find ways outside of Kickstarter to really grow that brand as well, because the whole Kickstarter thing is getting
it's diminishing returns.
Yeah.
Is what it is.
Yeah.
I will agree with you. It is. How do I want to say this? I'm less concerned about NSFW because that's always been part of comics, and and I don't have a beef with that. Right. But what you're going to see is, like I say, there's kind of two categories, right? Which is people that are great creators or great writers or great artists, and there's people that are great Kickstarter makers. And it's very seldom that the two connect. Now, I will say that they do connect in the case of Pat Shand. He's one of the good guys. He's written for Zenescope, and he's got novels, and he is able to do all these things. I think he's drifted a little bit toward his niche, which is NSFW, because it's very profitable, and he's respected doing that.
Right.
But I think that the net result of that is what you're seeing is some B and C and D tier creators all of a sudden going, hey, well, I'm going to put a naked lady on the cover of my crummy comic, and all of a sudden, guess what? It absolutely takes off. And again, hey, hats off to you if that's what you want to do. I get it. I got to make money too. So, I think the answer that's really going to define this, and this isn't a far away thing, it's going to be this year, which is going to be the prevalence of the AI generated book. And they've already seen the first probably 9 or 10 of these. And they do police this because you're not really allowed to do it. They kick you off the site. And if you look at it, you can tell, like, wait a second. There's never really any sample pages. And it's like a boilerplate description of what the book is.
Right.
And then the book is just really a compilation of AI images. And chances are it's probably written by AI too. So I don't know what the answer is there. I don't think the AI is going away, but I do think that for me to compete with it, because there is a finite number of dollars in that field. The customer is going to buy one or the other. So what I would probably do in my case, if this is what you're asking, I would double down to reach more out to my customers and offer them more content, because I'm probably not going to get that person who loves AI, and I'm not going to get that customer.
Yeah.
You might. I mean, I think the AI conversation has been dumbed down a lot in the comic space because people just think of it as, oh, they wrote the comic, they drew the comic. I mean, I'm not ashamed to say there's AI used in this podcast right here. Like, it's a tool, it needs to be used, and it's available. And we need to get used to it because it's not going anywhere.
Right.
But
exactly.
there are limits to it. Like, yeah, if somebody just types in a quick description, pops out a comic book, like, I have an issue with that. Like, you didn't do anything. But it's just it's such a deeper conversation than what the comic space has made it into. And it really frustrates me. I know you're not going down this, Tim, but it really frustrates me on, like, X or Facebook or whatever when I see people talking about it, because I'm like, none of you understand what the fuck you're talking about.
Right.
Yeah, but yeah, I do agree with you there. Like, the AI books are going to be an issue moving forward, and it's an unfortunate reality that I just think all of the creators are going to have to. There's going to be this whole thing, and this isn't an original thought. I've actually stolen this from somebody else, but there's going to be a thing in the next 5 to 10 years where your next issue of Call of the Cryptid will say, like, much like Rage Against the Machine did back in the day when they had the album that said no turntables were used in this album. You will have a thing that says, like, no, like, this is completely made by humans, by human hands and everything. And that's going to be a big thing. So I think there will be ways around
theory.
it.
I think you're right. There's a growing movement. And first, that's very well said, Chris. And let me tell you, you're 100% accurate on, look, AI is not going anywhere. It's a tool. It's not too different than, several years ago when it was, digital colorists. Remember that was kind of controversial.
Right.
And even to a lesser extent when artists, many of them, if not all, have now switched from doing pencils to, they're drawing on a Wacom tablet or a Cintiq or whatever.
Yeah.
Like, it's all digital art. And we really didn't have too much of a... Well, and I get why they did it, because the future's here, and that's the tool now. So, and I will say that I wouldn't. That's why I hesitate to join any groups that say things like absolutely no AI, because if you're making a hard line, it's something that's coming. I don't know what the final form will be, but my guess is it's something like what Chris said, where it will increase the value of people that, like, this is a pure human created. Human created product. But the truth is, and this is the unpopular part, you ready for this? Consumers don't seem to care very much at the current moment. And what I mean by that is, if you take an image and put it on, I'm going to say Facebook because that's something I use. A beautiful color image that took you an hour to make, and it's got a cool setting and blah, 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 blah. You might get 80, 90, 100 hits on that. And that's probably a pretty good response. But you put up an AI image of Darth Vader playing the drums, it'll get 50,000 hits. And I think that the challenge is two things. It's AI and what's being done with these, not necessarily public domain characters, but recognizable characters. Everything's kind of evolving, and that's why I'm very firmly trying to not do anything with public domain characters. I'm very firmly on my own books and my own characters. Like, even if I was, I'm going to talk out of both sides of my mouth for a minute. Like I've always joined anthologies, and I did some with Travis Gibb, thank you very much, and I did one with Russell Nolte, thank you very much, and I'm honored to do those things, and I think that helps build credibility as a writer. But then looking forward, I think that when you get to a certain level, you got to take a hard look at not doing that, especially in the sense of, well, I looked the other day, there was 4 Cthulhu books going at once. Okay, I get it. They're profitable. They sell, but how much is too much? And by the way, I've already been in one, so I really didn't want to go again. Yep. And then the second one is what I call the edgy fairy tale, which is things like
the grim fairy tale stuff.
Grim fairy tales.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. And there's an awful lot of that. Like if you look it up, there's 3 or 4 of those going at any time. And the other one, look, I'll be honest, because I'm in the water, it's cryptids. Mm-hmm. People are making a lot of cryptids books right now. And sometimes people even write to me and they say, hey, I hope you don't mind. I'm not copying you, whatever, but I got this cryptid book. And I would say, hey, look, I don't mind at all. I didn't invent the darn thing. And look, the truth of it is mine's so different than everybody else's. Go ahead, do what you want. Like mine is not a traditional take on anything, right? Mm-hmm. 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 So I think that the answer, like all things, is going to be somewhere in the middle. I think you're going to see a lot of original properties increasing in value because they're so original. Right. But I also think at the same time, you're going to see another increase in edgy fairy tales, Cthulhu books, and AI-generated NSFW content.
Yeah. Well, here's my controversial statement is there will be a great AI comic book that everybody will love. And people will buy it, whether they know it's AI or not.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, they say now this year, first let me preface this by telling you probably noticed that people are starting to lose their jobs already due to AI. I got a cousin who's, I'm not going to name him because I don't know if he would like that, but he was a director. He worked for Nickelodeon, and he makes children's television shows. And he was there for 19 years and making terrific money, and he won an Emmy. And he was let go last year. They're all being replaced by AI. Because as you know, a lot of animation is repetitive process and can be easily duplicated by AI. Maybe not easily, but can be duplicated inexpensively by AI, right? So, the first thing is, I guess I would say I have a little bit of a bias. But the next thing is, supposedly, and if I get this wrong, viewers yell at me in the comments, but now Sony is exploring these, it's an AI-generated movie. But when I say AI-generated, I mean the directing is AI-generated. Mm-hmm. Meaning like the shots and the camera angles, like they don't actually need a person to do that anymore. Wow. And of course, and it's allegedly the new Spider-Man movie. So hold on, it gets better. And then they're interviewing the people that work on it, which is, as you know, is always executives and people that aren't too creative. Yeah. And they say something like, look, we get it that right now AI is a little bit unpopular in the creative fields, and it's true. Mm-hmm. But it will take exactly one AI hit movie before it kicks the door open, and then everybody does it.
100%.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And supposedly you're going to see the one this year in 2025. So this is in some far distant future thing. Happening. Yeah, guys, we're going to see it this year. And that's one of the reasons why, I've been operating a little bit slower this year because I've got to sort of stake out my territory and figure out what my niche is, like I don't, how do I want to say this? Like if you would say, well, Kickstarter's got these categories, and it's, let's stay on the AI train for a minute. Oh, you got these AI-generated books, and they're doing, $80,000 a pop. Well, it'd probably be a little bit foolish if I didn't at least take a look at it. Right. But I don't do it now strictly because I don't want to, because I enjoy the creative process. It's the making, to me, it's the making of it that I find fun, not necessarily the selling of it. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So
both will exist. Both
I guess. Yeah, I think they can coexist too. And I think Chris was right in the sense that the future is likely to belong to people who in some way can marry the two and still be creative integrity. Mm-hmm. I don't know where that line is. So
I've seen where that line is. I've seen people using it, especially in writing, and I'm like, I get it's not necessarily because there's a lot of misunderstanding. We don't have to get too far into it, but I've seen where that line is, and it'll coexist at some point. It's coming, but I think it's funny when that whole writer strike was happening. Was that a year back now? 2 years?
Yeah.
And there was a lot of conversation and questions from creatives of why normal people don't care. And I thought it was funny as somebody who is more of a normal person, works a labor job, and is just like a normal dude. I was like, isn't it fucking obvious why? It's because you don't care about us. Because when it's our turn for someone to stand up and make a fuss about it, nobody says a peep. So, and I don't necessarily feel that way personally, but I see the people around me and they're just trying to get by, and they're working. And when they lose their job to one of these automation, AI, whatever, nobody gives a fuck.
Yeah.
So I think a big thing that creatives need to start doing is realizing that their biases are getting in the way. And if they really want people to care about AI and make it a big stink, there's your answer right there. Start really making a big stink and across the board. But we've gone into a huge AI conversation.
Yeah, I know.
It's interesting.
I'm sorry.
No, I'm glad you said that because, I think, first of all, I got to say, I agree with your take. And that's brave of you because most people wouldn't probably agree with that. But I have enough perception to know that he's probably closer to the truth than some of you might like to admit.
I just feel like it's reality. And you can agree or disagree, but it's reality. But
Before
we've had
we
you
wrap
for a while,
up,
so I know Mike wants to move on from this conversation. So let's go ahead.
I just want to. I have nightmares about AI, so I'm just a little traumatized.
The Terminator's coming.
Yeah, I'm just very terrified of Skynet. Right. Before we wrap up today, Tim, I want to talk about Water Wars 5 because that's we're here for you. And can you just give us the lowdown? What's the update on that, and when we'll be seeing it?
Yeah, actually, that one's actually a little bit further along than the Cryptid book. And in this case, we released what they call the Ultimate Edition, which is like your graphic novel. It's the one for the trade waiters, right? And what that book is, that's 160 pages or something. And it also has the stories that were in Travis's book. It has the stories that were in the anthologies. So it's a way to buy it and to get every story.
Perfect.
Great. So I released this book, and it's so terrific, and it was our top Kickstarter, and everybody really loved it. But man, the amount of people that wrote back to me and said, "Hey, when's number 5 coming out?" I went, "Okay, I better start right now."
Yeah.
And so we put that into production, and it'll be with artist Renan Shodi, who did number 3, who's really one of the top artists out of Brazil. It looks amazing.
Yeah.
And we've got a new colorist too, who's Marcos Rocha, and it's we're going to try and get the best stories, the best artists in the world, the best colorists, and that one will be on Kickstarter for sure. That'll be roughly around June or July, and same thing again. That's going to have another new song to go with it.
Nice, that's awesome. Yeah, I can't wait for that. And especially when you combine, you had enough to do a trade is pretty awesome in itself, I think.
And it did turn. I did make another deal with. I think it's okay to announce this.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know the issue number, but number 3 also got picked up by Antarctic Press again, so
cool.
It'll be available in comic stores. Just a friendly reminder to the viewers: when you buy it out of my studio, you can buy it off my website. That's earthdogstudios.com. It's called Water Wars 2288. When you buy it in comic stores from Antarctic Press, that's under their Planet Comics imprint.
Okay, cool.
So, you open it up and it is my story, but the cover will say, and it's even my art on the cover, but it'll say Planet Comics, which is their sci-fi arm. What they do is they're releasing, it's almost like an anthology. They have like a superhero arm that's exciting comics. Mm-hmm. They have one that's like sword and sorcery. It's like Conan-ish, and that's...
Is that the Jungle Comics?
That's Jungle Comics. Thank you. I couldn't remember it. And then their sci-fi one is Planet. So I'm grateful for that too. I've been in 4 or 5 of those now.
Cool. That's awesome.
They do it almost like the UK does it. Like it's a monthly book, but you're not necessarily getting. It's not always Superman every issue. It's
right.
Judge Dredd, and then it's
something else.
Whatever Commando.
It's like the metal magazine, right?
Yeah, Heavy Metal magazine.
Very much.
It's very popular in the UK. Yeah. That style of comic. Yeah.
Well, and you said it pretty well, because the one thing they do very well over at Antarctic Press is they're one of the few publishers that actually walks the walk to support indie creators.
That's great.
I mean, I've submitted to a couple of places, and as you know, a lot of times you have to submit what they call a pitch, or you can submit a whole script, or in my case, I can submit completed books. But it would be fair to say that in 2024, comic book publishers had a tough year. And, a couple of them went under, and you hear story after story about people not getting paid. And I think we might still be better off to release the books ourselves.
Yeah, because you never know what's going to happen.
Right.
There was always too much coming out. I've been feeling that for a while, and I thought the cream rise to the top, and the ones that didn't keep up fell. And I won't name names. Yeah.
Well, you're exactly right.
There's one still falling right now.
I know who you're talking about too. And even the guys that have been like, how do I want to say this? Because man, I have a small publishing deal. I don't even have a big one, but I'm grateful for that. But in my case, I'm not going to get too far in certain markets because I don't, as you guys know, there's no heroes in any of my books. They're all sci-fi themed. Like I have to start reaching out to, Chris mentioned earlier, like the sci-fi cons, and like I go to Star Wars cons. Like generally speaking, somebody that likes Star Wars, that's my customer. But if somebody says, "Oh, hey, I really love Batman," maybe not a match.
Right, exactly. Yeah, I think that's going to be interesting, and I know. I'm looking forward to the next installment of Water Wars, and I'm hoping you have a good year with that, and best of luck on the Kickstarter stuff. And Tim, it's always great having you on the show. We love taking all your time, and I know you plugged it a little bit before, but can you tell us, our listeners, our viewers, where they want to go to see more of you and get your books and stuff?
Absolutely. Thanks for letting me make a plug. I mentioned my website earlier, which is Earth Dog Studios. But increasingly, my main way that I'm communicating with my followers is through YouTube. Okay. And they have a what they call a handle now. I'm at Timothy Fling. That's one way to find me. Or it's all listed under the Earth Dog Network. And it is content. It's, quality podcasts, much like what you guys are doing. We're doing UFOs, ghost sightings, music reviews, and comics over there.
Amazing.
And last but not least, I'm up to something like 550 followers on Substack. Oh, and mine is a totally free platform. The idea is I provide all these, there's short stories, and I do music reviews and columns, and it's all free in the hopes that it's like me making a deposit to the fan base, and then when my book comes out, I'm going to please ask you to buy it.
Nice. That's a great approach.
But the Substack is, it's under my name, Timothy Fling, or you can Google it as Earth's Mightiest Substack.
Nice. I love that. That's a great name.
There you are. And to everybody out there watching and or listening, as you could hear me typing and looking away and all these things, I was trying to find those links for you so I could put them in the show notes down below. So make sure to check that out so you can just click right on it and see all this great work. Tim, it's been a pleasure just talking to you over this past hour or so, and we really look forward to doing it again sometime.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me, and please feel welcome to ever come on the show if you ever want to talk about UFOs or ghosts.
For sure. Yeah, for sure.